Thanks, Graham. Thank you, I think, everyone, for the opportunity for us to come here as a panel to talk a bit about data and how data can be our friend and our partner as we look towards planning for a stronger recovery after the last few months. I'm privileged to be joined on the panel with distinguished guests, right? Graham has already introduced them. What I'd like now to do is maybe call on each of them to give us a short introduction about what they do and what kind of perspective they will share about as we dive into the session later. So first I'll call on Alan Chan. Over to you.
Hello, Zik, and thank you everyone once again. Very honored and very privileged to be invited for this session to be a panelist. So my name is Alan. I'm the Chief Risk Officer and also the DPO for the Lazada Group. Lazada has been investing very heavily when it comes to protecting the data of our consumers, of our sellers. We're a marketplace, so being connected with different partners is for us is day in, day out, bread and butter of our business. So it's an important part for us, and I hope that today in the discussion I'll have a chance to learn from the panelists, learn from everyone, and also share what we've been doing in Lazada as part of data privacy and protection. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for that introduction. I'll turn next to Mark. Mark Pleczek, can you give us a short introduction about what you do and the perspective you hope to bring?
Yes, happy to do that. Thanks everyone for having me. I'm really excited to be here. As you've heard, my name is Mark. I'm the head of global privacy program at PayPal, and my job is basically to monitor the company's compliance with our data protection framework, and also, of course, to enhance the program to take it to the next step, because as you know, data and all those processes are ever evolving. So that's my main task. For those who are not too familiar with PayPal, we're a service, or a payment provider globally, a US-based firm, but we have our international headquarters in Singapore. And while we're doing our business, of course, we're collecting a lot of data, and we're living, as has been said so many times already, from our customers' trust, which is super important to us. And I hope I can give you a little bit of insight of what we're doing to let people know and let them feel comfortable of how we're treating their data and how we process it.
Thanks, Mark. And I'd like now to turn the time over to Dr. Xiao to give a short introduction of what he does, right, as CEO of Mana Doctor.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on this conference as a panelist. I'm actually a practicing physician. I'm also the CEO and founder of Mana Doctor, which is essentially a healthcare telemedicine platform that I founded 3 years ago. The main aim, of course, of this platform is actually to connect everyone, hopefully globally, to a trusted, accessible healthcare network from cradle to grave. And to accomplish this vision, we hope to bring a very competent and caring medical team to your doorstep. And of course, we want to offer, in conjunction with this, a very high model of quality, efficient healthcare that embraces the best practices and innovative technology. And of course, to achieve this, we need a very trusted model. Healthcare is actually about trust. And not just trust alone. As Zee has mentioned, we want to also touch briefly on how this trusted model of care allows us to accumulate accurate data to actually reach out to many other lateral businesses. And it is my privilege actually for IMDA to invite me to come on board to share our journey for the last 3 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Xiao. So let me just try and open with a few thoughts, right, and provoke some of the discussions that will come later on. So everyone usually associates a deputy commissioner of a personal data protection commission to basically usually talking about how you need to protect data, how you need to ensure that things are not your data does not leak and all the consequences of all that. But I want to take this opportunity to take a few steps back and really look at data, right? And ask ourselves this question: why do we protect data? And the thought I would like to just seed in everyone's mind is really, we protect data because there is value in the data that we are sitting on, right? And the protection helps us do a couple of things. One, it helps us preserve the value in the data so that it continues to be meaningful and useful. There's value, right? So if we don't protect, it deteriorates, right? So what does, in that sense, how do we increase the value, right, through some of the principles in data protection? And second, we also want to make sure that when an asset is valuable, it is used in the ways that we want them to be used. There's no misuse, right? So the typical illustration that we can think of is we have a car. We value and cherish the car, so we want to invest to make sure it's clean, runs well, and all that. And we also want to be sure that we don't anyhow let other people drive the car when we don't trust the person, right? And we don't want to take the car to places that that might run into risk of getting scratched or whatever, right? So it's that kind of perspective that I want to see, right, in the general as part of this starting point. How do we bring some of these very instinctive approaches, right, to the topic of data? And one of the things that I would like to propose is really this: data protection actually is very much aligned to this philosophy. A lot of the obligations in there is really about how do you ensure that data that is in your organization is well protected to ensure that the value remains. And I think one of the things that we need I would like us to examine and explore is really about how do we ensure there's good quality data, right? So that when we actually want to use the data, it gives us the right insight and accurate, right? It helps us make accurate decision. Another perspective we want to talk about is really to ensure that how the data, while it is in our possession, is actually used in the way that we want it to be used, right? We can use the language of protection so that it is to say that it is not abused, it is not misused, right? One of the things that we don't, one of the clear cases of misuse would be data is not well protected, and then the whole bunch left our organization through a data leak, right? So that actually impacts trust. But also to ensure that if there is value in the data within the organization, we want to be very clear about what are we going to use it for as well, and how are we going to use it to build that relationship that we have with our customers, with our business partners, right? To use it in the right way. So there is one around trust, right? There's going to be one topic we're going to talk about. The other one is really how data protection, one of the principles of data protection, which is around accuracy, right? Accuracy of data really speaks to the point that if data is valuable and we think it's valuable, we need to invest in ensuring that the quality of the data is good, it is accurate, and it helps us make accurate business decisions when we are using that data to guide our business decisions, product development, and how we relate to our customers. So that's kind of like the framing I would like to propose, right? Two big topics, right? Trust and accuracy, right? In using data and in unlocking the value of data. And the way we plan to have our discussion today is really to kind of like touch on three big areas. The first area is really about what are the basic data principles and hygiene issues that's fundamental to building trust. We will have some discussions about that, and then we'll move on to talk about data and data accuracy and how these can be levers to build consumer trust, and how these can be how data practices and measures can be important in building up this trust. And then we'll spend the last bit of our time together with the panel to talk about quality and accurate data, how these are important to enable good business decisions, and how businesses can actually make use of data to improve their products and services to create new ones or to run more efficiently. So to kick us off on the first topic, right, on the fundamentals, basic data principles and hygiene, I'd like to ask Alan to lead us in that discussion and really just share with us his perspectives and his thoughts about what are the basic hygiene issues so that we have a firm foundation on which to build, right, that consumer trust and that future use of data. So Alan, could I ask you to lead this discussion by just sharing with us some of your thoughts before I call on some of the other panelists to respond.
Okay, sure. And thank you, Zeke, once again for laying the opening for us. And there's a lot of very wise things that you have said, which actually resonates with the way that Lazada looks at data protection and data privacy. I think before I share some of my practical advice on how to get started in the area of, I would say, building a strong foundation for data, I want to reiterate the importance, because I was actually joining a few minutes before this particular panel, and there was a particular phrase that was mentioned, which is data is a new currency, right? And it sounds fancy, but if you take a step back and think about it, right, there's a lot of meaning in that particular phrase, right? It's the new money. And all of us protect money, right? We put it either with the banks, or we invest it with the ambition and with the objective of trying to make it safe, at the same time to grow it, right? And it's been so fast. I mean, I cannot imagine that for the past few years, there's so much data there is now that we as consumers, we are giving to enterprises. And we as enterprises, we are also being asked to take on this new responsibility, right? And it's a very new responsibility. And I think, to be honest, everyone, right? Companies in the private sector, regulators, right? And even privacy think tanks, we are all trying to figure out what's the best way to regulate this data. And it's such a fast-moving industry. And if you might have felt that you figured out the right way to define the regulation, and then a year later, that model expires, right? Because it's such a fast-moving mechanism. And I think with this whole new direction, it actually calls upon all of us. It calls upon companies in the internet sector, like Lazada. It calls upon the regulators. It calls upon everyone, right, man on the street, to work together to define this new way of governing data. With that as a context, I want to share with everyone maybe some practical examples of how we've actually approached to build the foundation of doing security and protection for data. And many of us are familiar with the iceberg concept, right? Above the water, you have a small piece of ice, but below the waters is a long piece of iceberg. And I think the work involved in data protection is very similar to iceberg. There's a very deep foundation that needs to be laid for us to present the top to the consumers. Three tactics that I normally use, which I hope will be helpful to everyone. The first thing is to identify what are your crown jewels. What are the most important data in your organization? I can imagine that in many industries, right, whether you are in manufacturing, whether you are in oil and gas, whether you are in the internet sector, like Lazada, we have a lot of data, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen people do is to try and boil the ocean and try to cover protection for all the data with one single standard, right? It's quite dangerous because you will spend a lot of money, you will spend a lot of time, and you'll only get a marginal increase because you're trying to move everything up at the same level. My advice is always to ask a very honest question to management and to everyone in the company, right? Especially those who are actually close to the consumers. What are the most important data points to the company and to our consumers, right? And once we've answered that, then we can do segmentation. For those very important data points, we will doubly invest. We will double down. We'll ensure that there's going to be a much stringent process for employees to access the data. We'll ensure that from a cybersecurity perspective, there is going to be a double down in trying to harden the layers to where the data is stored. And once you do that, then you're able to segment your strategies accordingly. So my first practical advice would be to always ask ourselves, what are the most important crown jewels, right, in our organization? The second one is not used a lot, but I have come to find it quite useful, especially in large organizations, which is the organization cultural mindset shift, right? Where everybody is a DPO, right? Think about it, right? DPO is the one that represents the company to represent the company in terms of ensuring that there is a very clear and sound data protection policy. But everybody in the company should be a DPO, right? From the designer of a product to the data maintenance architect to the frontline customer service agent that gets a lot of data. Everybody should know that data is such a valuable asset, and in their day in, day out work, they are then responsible to ensure that they are also a steward of the data, and to make sure that in all their work, they take data protection seriously and not make sure that they are very careless around the data. So and that requires a lot of sharing, a lot of raising of awareness, a lot of cooperation with HR to drive that message. But I think we can only succeed not only via a top-down approach, where management says it's important and we expect top-down to happen. I think the best way for us to get the effect is through a platform effect where everybody in the company works together to drive data protection and security. So that's my second recommendation. My third recommendation is to talk about privacy from a compliance, not only from a compliance perspective, but more importantly, from a consumer or from a customer point of view, right? I've always believed that data privacy is not a compliance topic. Privacy is actually a consumer trust topic. It's a very emotional topic, right? The emotions and the feeling of trust is what is above the iceberg, and all the work that is being done is below the iceberg, right? But we have to ask ourselves, what is the most important to our consumers? How do I make my consumers feel? How do I make my customers feel that the data is safe, right? And that requires a lot of thinking, not only from a pure tech and from a compliance point of view, but more like a right brain, right? More like a marketing, a psychology angle, to think about it from our customers, how they will feel safe with the data. And once you have that objective clear, work backwards, right? On your product, on your channel management, on your website, right? With a sales agent as well. Then you can work backwards to then define the right way to make sure that consumers feel safe. Okay? So these are things that are very close to my heart. And I think with these three practical things that we do, one around crown jewels, define them. Secondly is to get all the employees on build that emotional trust. I think these are very practical ways to actually help us to drive protection for our data. Thank you, and Zik, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I think you raised three very, very valid points, right? So first is really about how we take a risk-based approach, identifying the assets which are most valuable, right, and of the greatest risk, right, if somehow they will compromise. Second, building that culture, right, throughout the entire organization. Because sometimes the weakest link could be that frontline officer, could be that other officer who's just doing a pretty routine job in administering data. So having that culture that permeates and for people to understand that they are handling data of customers, right? And they need to treat them well. And then I think the third one is really about accountability. And this is where I think that in addition to accountability to customers, I think accountability to business partners is also equally important, right? And I think that some of us play roles in where it's a more B2B play, or sometimes a significant B2B play, right? And having the accountability to business partners. Equally important, sometimes if you're more consumer facing, then consumer accountability takes a slightly bigger weight. So I'd like now to ask perhaps Dr. Xiao first, right? To give us your perspective on what you've just heard, because I think Alan made a lot of sense, right? Dr. Xiao, so what's your take on what Alan has just put forward, right? And do any of these points resonate with what your experience has been in the initial building up of your startup, Mother Doctor?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. What Alan has just shared, I think is of extremely important. Now, for Manadoc, essentially, we are a healthcare company. We deal with tremendous amount of healthcare data, both from the doctors as well as the patients. The patient personal health record is actually at our fingertips, you see. So that this is of paramount importance to us. That's why as a company itself, when we first started off, we built a structure in the context of what Alan has shared to identify what is the most important data, the so-called crown jewel, essentially the patient medical record. Now, what we deep dive inside is not just everything about the patient that we want, We identify key data set that we think is critical to the company, critical to the patients. Now, being a healthcare, we don't just take any important or any data that comes along, I think the basic, how we call the minimum data set was actually built and identified. And that is critical because in handling patient trust, I just gave a very good example of what is so critical. A simple drug allergy, the data on whether a patient is sensitive to a certain drug. Now that is critical to every single patient in terms of healthcare. So we identify key data that we must actually collect for every patient, not just for the sake of we want to collect them, okay, but mainly for the sake of being accountable to deliver good care, to be able for our provider, the doctors, to deliver good care. So that's key. Now the second part, which of course when you share that, we emphasize that now because we are handling patient data, everybody in the company must know that they fulfill their role well, whether they are frontline support staff. Data must not flow out freely. Each one is accountable. We make everyone in the organization accountable for that portion of the information they share. And one of the key things that we also ensure very strictly is what can be shared and what cannot be shared. What can be made known and what cannot be made known. Now, and what must be anonymized. So we build that from day one. Certain data in healthcare must be fully anonymized and we identify them, you see. So in the event that should there be a breach or hacking, we know that critical medical information will unlikely be breached, So that's what we have spent a lot of time thinking through that. And when we start off this company, in fact, that's the foundation that we lay before. Otherwise, when we go to the market, we can't expect people to trust us. And that is also one of the reasons when the data protection trust mark come up, we were one of the very first company to put ourselves, not so much as to, through this rigorous process, not so much as to, we want to gain the trust mark, but so much as to see whether as a company itself, we have set the standard right or not from day one, you see. Yeah, I think that's the most thing. Now, of course, in terms of what we've always shared with our customer is we want our customer to be comfortable to know that they can share their data freely with us. Now, we will not be able to deliver good and accurate care if the patient cannot share their data freely. I give you a very good example. You see, a single date of birth is critical in deliver healthcare. I must know that this patient is 5 years old or 60 years old, see. We can't afford to have data that is not accurate because delivering of healthcare, the drug dosage is different, And henceforth, in the way, especially in Manadoc, is every individual must be identified accurately. We can't be seeing somebody across a telemedicine platform based on online persona. You know, and we will be delivering wrong care. So things like this. So you can see, Alan, thanks for your laying down that three things, which is critical. In fact, I didn't even realize that we've been doing that. You know, and when you share, actually, yeah, that's all I've been doing. But you put it in a fantastic point form, you say, which across the whole company, when anybody who join us, we already started the first thing, please handle data with care, because you are handling critical, confidential, and highly classified data, put it that way, you know. Yeah, thanks. For you to use it.
Thanks, Dr. Xiao. I think that's a very useful perspective, right? I was about to call on Mark to give us a slightly different perspective from a larger multinational organization, but I think he's experiencing some technical difficulties. So while we try to get him back online, perhaps what I'd like to do is really to kind of like move the discussion on to the next topic, right? Which is really about picking up where we left off in Dr. Xiao's comments, right? Sorry, what I'll do is I'll just jump over to the last topic, right? Which is really about the use of good quality data, right, to enable good business decisions, right, and how that's going to be important to help us develop products and services. Good. Mark is back. We lost you there for a while, and I was about to reshuffle some of our topics. So maybe what I'll do is then I'll just go back to what we planned, right? And I on this topic about the hygiene and the best practices and what to put in place, right? Can I ask Mark for you to bring a bit of the perspective of how you look at these issues, right? Especially when you have to take care of much larger data sets, right? Spanning across almost the entire globe, right? So what's the perspective you bring and what's your experience like? Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much. And my apologies that I dropped there. Somehow the internet connection broke up. I'll try my best to do it better now. Thanks again for having me. One quick word to what Alan earlier said and your question, Zeke, kind of like if that resonated with us. PayPal being a two-sided platform, not only talking to customer, but also business customers. So, you know, we're connecting a customer with a business, with a merchant. That's super important that you really have those two interests in mind all the time and really help them, not only, you know, a customer to understand what we are doing, but also a merchant probably to help their business grow by way of the data. It flows through us, of course, always under the framework of data protection laws and DAO accountability, what I will talk about now. So that was super interesting insight. Thanks, Alan. Let me just quickly start before sharing some kind of like a little insight in the accountability model and how this creates trust and then makes people share more data than they probably usually would, and also more accurate data, since we're talking about that, because people trust your company. And this how then leads to the fact that you can enable your business and grow your business significantly. About what we have experienced now, well, right in the pandemic, and now also, you know, going out of it hopefully soon. So fingers crossed there. But as a payment processor, can you still hear me? Yeah, okay. As a payment processor, what we are seeing at the moment is, of course, a lot more of e-commerce. So a lot more people pay through PayPal at the moment. And the reason for that for us, obviously, is that they seem to be more willing to explore new means. So thinking about contactless payments, for example, people are now more willing to trust companies like ours with contactless payments through the internet, because they say, well, that's the easiest way to do it and to go about it. So there is a clear shift to e-payment, and of course our company, so PayPal, wants to benefit from it to some extent, which is why we've really heavily invested to make sure that we put some accountability principles in place, and I will run you through a few of them, which really conveys the message to a customer: hey, your data is safe with us. If you have questions, please come and ask. Whatever we do, we are able to explain it to you. And then ultimately, of course, how can we raise issues that are coming up? Because I think data protection and privacy is probably one of those areas that's ever changing. So one day is never like another. So even in my job, I do that on a daily basis and I live for it. And I breathe it and live it, but the questions are always different. So you have to have an escalation path as well. So these are the 4 big things I wanted to bring to your attention. So if I start, clearly, if you want to create trust with a customer, the company needs to talk with one voice. And it pretty much resonated with me what Alan said, that everyone is a DPO. I would love to say that. We're kind of like educating our employees as well to be like an everyday DPO. But that only comes with, excuse me, with specific guidance, and that comes through policies and procedures. So you have to be very, very clear on roles and responsibilities within your company. Who does what? When, with what kind of database? What is this person allowed to do? All of these questions you have to ask yourself. For example, accessing data, there need to be clear roles and responsibilities. So someone needs to own the database. Those people who access the database need to make sure that, you know, we need to make sure that they are allowed to do it. Just imagine, for example, marketing. A marketing team probably doesn't need to see all the data that an AML, so anti-money laundering expert, needs to say. So here are the restrictions you really have to put in place. What you also need to see and evaluate is the purpose of the processing and the legal basis. So make sure that you know why you're processing your data and if you're allowed to do so. Because it's easy to collect data and collect and collect and collect. But if at some stage you're under scrutiny because you're using data in a way that is probably not allowed, that will hit the headlines of newspapers at some stage and you will lose trust. And as said, for a business like PayPal, that's the worst case scenario, because if people don't trust us with their financial tools and means, then we don't have any business. So that's super important. Then also guidelines in decision making. So if you, for example, talk about complaints coming in, every company, every bigger company has somehow customer complaints, and that's actually a good thing. So don't think about it negatively, because it challenges you and it challenges your processes, and you get better if you really try to focus on it and make it your processes better. So for example, it's of utmost importance to us, if a customer complaints come in, then make sure that you answer right away, that you have a very timely responses, very detailed responses, and explain what they want to hear. So try to reduce templates to the minimum, because templates don't create trust. Templates is just a holding response, more or less, because there will be questions back to you. Which brings me ultimately to the next key principle as well, which is, of course, the transparency. So whatever you do with customer data, make sure that they understand what you're actually doing with the data. It doesn't help anyone, so neither the company nor the customer or the merchant customer or a business partner, if you don't know the answer to questions coming in. Because the easiest answers of your partners at the same time can be the most difficult ones. So make sure that you have all your responses in place, and also in a timely way, without too much holding responses. The one thing I also wanted to mention is, which we found very, very important at PayPal, is that you have to have this famous escalation path to some extent. So we have 3 forums, you may call them, at PayPal. One is the data ethics board, which I think is important, because that, even though not visible to the outside world, the data ethics board helps us to avoid what we recently called the creepy factor of privacy and data protection, right? So things that pop up in a window all of a sudden and people don't understand them too well, and they don't understand where this company has the information from and how they used it, so that they can now, for example, promote a product or something like that. So the data ethics board is responsible for this, and also for, if you work a lot with algorithms because you want to grow your business, to make sure that the algorithms are actually not biased, that they stem from accurate data, and that you can use them going forward. We also have a privacy advisory board where the chief privacy officer, the data protection officers, and all other privacy experts come together and really think together with the interest of the company and the customer in mind of how you can, take your privacy program forward. And then lastly, of course, which is a little bit like the forum I just mentioned, we have a business advisory committee as well, where all the stakeholders of the company, no matter which region, come together and give their input on plans that we want to install from a privacy perspective. Because you have to, everyone who works in that area knows already that, if you have a privacy interest in mind, it probably isn't really aligned with something that another team wants to do. So you have to find the way in the middle to make it compliant that serves the customer, but also the company. And all in that together, I believe, creates a feeling for a customer that their data is handled in a very safe and in a very accurate way as well. It's not, used for whatever the company wants to use it. And if you can convey this message by way of basically answering to responses or bringing it to the leaders of your company with new issues, timely responses, that creates the trust that you need so that people share data with you that they would probably not always share with every company. And if you're the one who obtains this more accurate data, as we call it, and more data from the customer because they feel safe, well, then you also have the advantage to work with that data, of course, within the given privacy framework, to enhance and actually grow your business more or less, sometimes significantly. And I want to close my little speech with one example we saw at PayPal. Through the pandemic and the data and transaction which flew through PayPal, of course, we had an insight of which products were probably not yet live in other regions where we could grow our business by way of new product launches and make sure that we get the best out of it, but as well the customer who needs it in a specific region where we probably don't offer it yet. Thank you, Zeke. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. I think one of the things that struck me while listening to you is really how this works hand in glove with what Alan spoke about. You see, here, Alan has started off by saying that we need to know what are the assets and what's of value, and we can't use the same standard and same measure to protect everything. Dr. Seow talked also about be clear about what you really need, right? Don't over collect, don't collect too much, but collect what you need, because then you're able to make better use of it, understand it better. And what you've shared gives us an insight on what, on one end of the scale, for a very large multinational that's handling global data, what kind of layers of internal controls, checks, right? And processes that might be, and I would imagine that the kind of work that you do in culture building is pretty extensive. And one of the things that I heard really from this is really that you can't apply this to data uniformly for everything. We really have to be very clear about how much we want to get and collect, which are of value for us, and how do we tier our response. And one of the things that you mentioned is really about the need for this in order to build the consumer's trust in the brand, so that they are prepared to continue using the products and services, continue to contribute data, and that it's actually a virtuous cycle, right? You actually get more of that, and then as they use data, right, the company actually will be able to make better decisions, especially when the data is accurate. And on that point, I'd like to get Alan to jump back in, right, and really give us some perspective, because one of the things we talked about is really how do we educate consumers, right, and to ensure that they are prepared to be engaged in this way, to participate in this way in an honest way, right, so that the data that's generated by the use of the service is accurate. And this brings me to another point that Dr. Xiao mentioned, that you need to deal with the actual customer so that you can get a good, accurate understanding of what the customer is doing on your platform, so that you're better able to offer products and services, offer services to the customer, as opposed to interacting with a persona. Because I think the other thing that we've seen is that if consumers don't trust, right, and don't trust the company, they create temporary accounts and they fill it up with makeshift data. They use it and they throw it away, right? And that actually becomes poor quality data that might actually affect the quality of your entire data set and what decisions can be made out of that. So I'd like Ellen to really share with us some perspective about how do you educate consumers? How do you engage consumers so that they understand and they're prepared to have this honest engagement, and so that the quality of the data is built up? Ellen?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think there might be a short lag in my connection, but if it's okay, I'll just keep on talking. Here in Lazada, we talk a lot about this term called friction, as in friction, right? And we use it a lot when it comes to have a face-to-face channel, right? As in a physical human person sitting in front of you to address your questions. Many a times our interactions, many a times our the desire to reduce friction for our customers when they come to us for everything. When they come to us for inquiries, when they come
Okay, I'm not getting Ellen very well. I'm not sure whether there's an issue. Perhaps what we could do is give some time for the network to recover and Ellen to get back online, right? Maybe I'll turn the time to Dr. Xiao, right? And can I ask for you to really share that, to give me your comments really around that same question I posed as well. Because you mentioned, right, that one of the things is that if consumers don't trust, right, you don't get the accurate data, your service actually depends on the need for very accurate data. So can you give us a bit more, a bit of perspective from your service point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Chick. So in the way that we deliver healthcare, especially for Maladoc as a platform, so the first thing that we want is we want the consumer to trust us. Now, trust is a two-way process in healthcare. See, if there's no trust, the doctors and the patient relationship is not there. There's no point continuing on because we can't deliver proper, accurate care. See? So whenever the context is being met, now the providers know that they must have accurate data. Now, therefore, in our business point of view, the providers, generally we are talking about the medical personnel, the doctors, the paramedical staff, must know who their customer, the clients, the patients are. See? And we use various methods of verification. So it's unlike a lot of other business model, we have to accurately verify who we are dealing with. And that's the first key entry point. And for the consumer to be able to trust us, they must at the same time know who are they talking to, who are they dealing with on the other side of the coin. So for healthcare, of course, it is facilitated by the process of various avenues, like we use video verification, we verify through their identity card. Exactly the same way where we verify a patient in our clinics, you see. So we have translated what is done in the physical realm to the digital realm. And that's how the first step of building up this business is. And we make that mandatory to deliver this good care. In the early days, of course, the patient say, how can I trust your platform? How can I know that who am I dealing with? But as we gain traction, we find that people start to trust us more and more because we have quality personnel that deliver this care. I think hard is we find like-minded partners. When I say partners, I'm talking about the medical providers, the one who deliver this care. They are of good repute, of good standing, and we have an ethical committees. See, the same way as our PayPal has structured, we have our own ethical committees. We vet through those partners that comes on board. We make sure that they are able to deliver, and they are actually doctors of good standings or good reputes, you see. And in fact, interestingly, PayPal is here. In my presentation to many of our clients and potential investors, I always say that in the financial realms, nobody asks whether I should trust PayPal. They just transact the money through that, you see. So in the same way, when we build Maladoc, we want to make sure that people trust us the same way they trust our banks. Digitally, the same way they trust PayPal. So interestingly, over the last, especially the last 1 year plus, especially with the COVID coming on, we hardly have anyone who said, can I trust your platform or not? Can I actually know that, because we have gained a reputation of being able to build a very good trusted network of providers, thousands of them, and we are able to also for the public to understand that when they come to us, they must be very honest and frank to say, yeah, back to you.
Thanks, Dr. Xiao. Alan is back online, and I think his connection is better. So can I pass the time back to Alan? But I suggest that maybe you start from the beginning. I think
Okay.
that might actually be much smoother. Yeah.
Alan,
Sure.
So is it now fine? Can you hear me and see me clearly now?
Yes, much better than before.
Okay, yeah, so I'll try and compress what I just shared. I was talking a lot about, in the internet sector, we have this phrase called friction that we use a lot because most of our interactions, as many of you know, are actually done virtually. We don't have a physical person sitting, in front of you. And therefore, to reduce the friction when customers come to us is very important, right? So if I bring that concept to the area of data privacy and trust, I would almost say that the first time a consumer or a customer comes to us, it's actually not very nice to ask them to fill up a long list of things, who you are, your address, and even try and throw in some marketing survey questions, right? Your gender, your age. And I see still today a lot of companies do that. And maybe because they feel that it's the only channel that they can get data from, and they want to maximize the opportunity, right? My perception and my advice actually to quite different is to minimize the data, right? So in Lazada, as many of you know, when you come and sign up to be a customer for the first time, we only ask for either your email address or we ask for your phone number, and you just start shopping, right? We make it easy. And later, when you get used to Lazada, when you trust us more, when you buy something and the thing gets delivered to your doorstep and you have a good customer experience, what happens? The trust goes up one notch, right? And when the trust goes up one notch, then the willingness to share data goes up also one notch, right? So I always feel that data giving is like a friendship, right? The more you know someone, the more you trust your friend, then you begin to open up more to the person. And I think it's the same between customers and organizations. As we build our trust, as we are more and more reliable to the consumers, then the willingness of the consumer to give accurate data also increases. Why? Because I know that if I'm open to a company, I get more accurate recommendations. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know that this particular brand was there. And oh, wow, this brand is not very well known, but it has a very good quality. I wouldn't know that if I have not been open with my data sharing with with companies. So I think I always felt that the recipient of good data, the prerequisite is that the organization, which is us, right? We have the responsibility to build trust with our consumers. And as the trust goes up, then the willingness of consumers to share data, to give accurate data, then correspondingly moves along. There's one very interesting data point. We ran a survey recently for Singapore-based customers, and we found that almost 2/3, right? So in other words, out of 10 people, almost 6 of them actually said that in the actual words, right, that they are more likely to make online purchases from companies with certified with data protection, right? So in other words, for example, the trust mark, right, certification from IMDA or other types of trust mark or other types of data certifications, because consumers feel safe, right? They feel that there is actually a standard that they can actually put their trust in, and they can actually know that the company, right, is trustworthy, and then therefore be much open to transact and to give data points to the company. Over to you, Zik.
Thanks, Alan. And I think that I'll try to bring an idea that was running through my head, right, as I listened to you speak, right. It's really about the fact that you minimize, right, the amount of data that you collect each time, right, but you maximize the interaction because you want the customer to continue engaging, participating, and coming back. And what you're saying is that actually through actual usage of the service, the data that is being contributed each time builds a more accurate picture of what the customer is really interested in, and that enables you to actually be a lot more accurate again in kind of like personalizing the service for the customer. And I think that is one of those things that is that tip of the iceberg. Because if I draw that back to the analogy you started with, and what Mark was sharing about the work that had to be put in place, is really the tip of the iceberg. That the experience of the customer, right, behind it all, you really have to put all those controls in place to ensure that while you are accumulating and while you are curating and taking care of the using the data from each of these customers, right, the right controls are in place, there's no misuse, and the trust continues to be built, right? And the other thing that this discussion kind of leads us on to is our third point, right? The third topic we want to talk about, which is really about how, when using this kind of accurate data, you're able to, in Lazada's case, offer a more personalized service. In Mark's sharing just now, being able to identify that there might be certain markets where certain products have not yet been delivered, but which might actually be useful, right, to introduce that product, right? So what I might want to do now is really to just ask each of our panelists, right, to share with us an example of how using data has enabled you to develop something, create something new, right? Offer a new product, a new service, or just do something different, demonstrating the benefits of being able to make use of accurate data in a way that is positive, both to the organization, because it's a new product, new opportunity, and also a better experience or a new experience for the customer. Maybe I'll start with Dr. Sel first, and then I'll call on the rest. Dr. Sel.
Thanks. Yeah, just to share, as I mentioned, we deal with lots of tons of medical data. So, of course, in the organization, the way we look at it, all this data flow in an anonymous fashion. Now, I give a very clear-cut example of the recent search in usage and data that has flowed in. So we have identified, for example, there's a huge need in terms of mental health. See, So we know this become a clear-cut issue. It allowed the company to have a macro view of where we are going, where we are heading. Now, to anticipate that, the company is able to say that we want to roll out services to cater to the mental health, either of the foreign workers or the general population. We are all stuck in the house, you say, for months, and truly it reflects that we have more people seeking help in terms of being stressed, couldn't sleep well, and all this. See, now it allows us to curate services to the need of the masses. Now that's one key point. The other thing is also it allowed us to alert on a national and a bigger level that, look, this is problems that we have to foresee. We have to actually take a preemptive step. Now, as a company itself, of course, we benefit. We pull in psychologists, mental health professionals to cater certain algorithm and logic, pick up these people and say, look, if you have mental health issue or you are stressed, which are the hotline that you need to approach to tackle? Now, that allows us to actually cast a bigger net. Now, on a micro level, this accurate data is also tremendously important. With the pickup of the accurate data, we are able to identify who are the potential patients, for example, at risk of high blood pressure, because we do monitor their parameter quite closely, and who are the ones that who are at risk of potentially of stroke or heart attacks. See? Now, so you can see that in a nutshell, it allows the company to actually look beyond what we are heading now. The height and weight of a patient, the accuracy of data allow us to deliver a very timely and accurate care. I just want to highlight one key example of how it is so critical. Okay, I myself see one patient recently, which is very interesting that I couldn't understand what she was trying to tell me. He said, I couldn't have enough oxygen, you know, and that's late at night, 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning. I couldn't understand, but luckily we have pulse oximeter with the workers. He put it on, and I find that his oxygen level is actually 99 to 100%. But the amazing part is his pulse rate was racing at 140. So we are able to identify critical problem take to individual patient, you see, and activate the ambulance. And when I look back, he was seen previously for 2 to 3 episodes without actually his problem being picked up. But with such accurate monitoring of data at our fingertip, we actually solve his problems, you see, and found what is his actual diagnosis. And that's why in an individual level, on a very micro level, we are able to manage accurately also and deliver good care and instant accurate care. Of course, on the macro level as a cover, they help us to plan for a bigger scope where we are heading to challenges or bigger crises that's coming upon.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Xiao. Maybe I'll ask Mark, right, to share a bit about your experience, right, in using data during this period for new products, new services, before I ask Ellen to finish up.
Yeah, so in the sake of time, very quick insights from me. I spoke already about the fact that PayPal looked into products that we could launch in different regions just because we had the data and learned from it. But there's one additional thing I'm currently working on, which is super interesting when you talk about accurate data, and it's in context of marketing, and to move away from like a rather general consent for marketing and then simply bombard people with marketing material versus a way where you can profile and learn and know your customer better so that you can market specific products to them, for which you of course need a more granular consent. But the benefits of a more targeted marketing is much, much higher than just simply bombarding people with marketing material, because they usually just delete it and they even overlook the stuff that they're interested in. So we're now, me and my team, we're now currently looking really into this consent, more granular consent. And the super interesting piece of that work is, where can you put the consent? So talking about real-time consent, where in the product experience, so for example, if you go through a payment process with PayPal, or you onboard at PayPal for an account, where can you put these kind of consents that they're not disrupting the process, that they're interesting to the customer, and that they can be, so the customer can be educated for example, by a pop-up window or maybe by a little hover over, I can explain to them what happens if they now consent to this function and how they completely, can withdraw it at the same time if they want. To give them really the flexibility and to be agile, to opt in things and opt out on the go. Because that, again, also creates trust, and you can learn so much more about your customer, so much more detail, that that will be a whole new experience, not only for the customer, but also for a marketing team. And I think that's where it's important to talk about accurate data, because you really need the information, not to bombard people with the wrong market or product.
Thanks, Mark. I think you bring up a very good points, right? That tying in with what Alan was speaking about earlier. Maximize your touch points, collect data as little as possible, as often as you need it, right? Maximizing it, and at each point in time, explaining so that they understand, willing to contribute, willing to participate, right? And getting your consent just in time, right? I've been buzzed a couple of times by the organizer, time's running out, but I want to ask Ellen, right, to just close off and also share, right, from your experience, how use of data has been helpful in product, services, or better personalized service. Ellen.
Okay, Zeke. And Zeke, I promise you I'll keep it to less than 1 minute. Otherwise you will get buzzed again by the organizers. So I'll be talking a lot today about customers in terms of our actual buyers, right? Because we're a marketplace. We are merchants, we are partners, we are buyers. And maybe I spend the last minute talking about our merchants and how data helps us, right? And we have a lot of merchants on our platforms. I'm not privy to share exactly what is the number, but it's at a volume beyond simple human management, and that's where data comes in. And how we have used data is to identify very young and high potential merchants that needs the extra help during the COVID situation. For example, they may not be carrying big brands, but maybe it's a locally made, let's say, a locally made batik in Indonesia. Or it could be maybe some simple foodstuffs made by a Thailand merchant, right? Good quality, great ratings and reviews from customers, but there is no brand power to move them forward. So what we do is that data allows us to identify this kind of high potential small customers. We reach out to them. We enable them by giving them more tools and solutions. We give them more channels to do their marketing. We enable them to actually get more business to be done on our platform. And in the end, they actually then go into a self-sufficient cycle to then be able to move from a small company to a medium-sized one, right? So today we don't have time. I will not talk about this too much, but data also helps us to play that responsibility, right? The corporate responsibility of enterprises to help companies to succeed in this very challenging environment. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And on that note, right, I think what you touched on a fresh topic which had popped up in the Q&A, which I was hoping to touch on, which is really about ethics, right? Using data and how you make ethical decisions on data. Very often we talk about it in the context of how ethics applies to consumers and customers, right? And you've given us a good example of how an ethical organization can use the same approach with partners as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but that actually is a very good indication of the dynamism and the interest that this topic has, right? And one of the things that I probably will have to go back and think about is really having a follow-on panel and to bring some of these discussions to the next level, talking about ethical use of data and how use of data can actually promote some of our corporate values and things, and build, right, the trust, right, with our customers. So with that, I'd like to invite everyone to join me in thanking our panelists for taking the time to join us. And well, I should mention that Mark is actually up at 5 a.m. by now, his time. So yeah, thanks for staying up to join us. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the time that each of you have taken, and even Dr. Xiao, I think he's had to rush off for a 12 o'clock call as well, right? So just thank you all for taking the time to join us for this discussion, and I hope that everyone of the participants found it useful as well. Thank you, and I'll pass the time back over to the host.